Hello and welcome to this Mobalytics video, and in it we are going to be taking a look at the top 15 OP solo queue champions that you need in order to 1v9 in Season 10. I am Virkayu and I will once again be your host for this video, and at the start of the season you usually have the biggest flux of players. Those who have taken breaks, those who haven't played the whole preseason, those who spam all day every day, those who only play on blue moons and when it rains on a Thursday. This means there can be a wider variety and a bigger spread in the skill of the players, and it can make it basically a really big mess for you. The easiest way of dealing with that is to basically hard carry and try and 1v9 every game yourself. And the champions we're going to look at in this video are the best at doing that. So if you have found a 1v9 champion that isn't on this list or one that you like playing, let us know in the comments. And just as a disclaimer, we have picked numerous champions per position, but we've mixed it up in terms of how much we think they can impact solo queue wins. And with that behind us, let's begin. Obviously, first up we must talk about Echo. This champion has run unchecked in the jungle meta for quite a few months at this stage. Decent first clear, insane lockdown, can go Electrocute, Conqueror or Dark Harvest, not to mention he's a perfect flex to the mid lane. Decent clear, really strong W lockdown at level 1. His R is the ultimate safety net, pun intended. And with such a raw scaling one-shot champion that is really forgiving, especially from a role that requires you to gank and have insane macro presence, it's kind of hard to go wrong with this pick. Now, Vladimir might not be Dracula, but he is definitely a blood-sucking heathen of a champion that I absolutely... Oh wait, I have to be objective. He's definitely a fair... No, you see, I can't. The champion is just so strong. He can one-shot people with a stacked Q even early, and, you know, later on the entire team. He has crazy high damage, crazy high sustain, goes through everyone. His scaling is bigger than when humanity first figured out what exponents were. And because he keeps getting stronger and stronger, the fact that he's hard to shut down with his pool, Zhonya's heal, and that's all in addition to his damage, so you can understand not having the right team come against him, not having the right itemization, can basically make him feel like a true immortal. And now we know Vlad can go top lane or mid lane, but let's keep it in the mid lane because since a rework, Diana has had control of the meta. She doesn't scale as well as some of these others on the list, but she hits harder earlier. Thanks to the bug fix and the adjust on the Ardent Sensor build, Rvzstealez is once again back in the picture and can give you some backup scaling, or you could rush Protobelt just to nuke everyone. What are your priorities? Nashus is still a good item for split pushing and longer fights, works really well with their Conqueror build still, and it's important to note that the ultimate is way more useful now. It's better in team fights, it combines with Zhonya's, it makes you easier to survive as you dive, and can still have some upsetting damage for ADCs. She's kind of like a half assassin, half mage bruiser. Sort of. And now for the next two picks, we are going to stick in the mid lane. First up, we have Katarina, the usual suspect solo queue demon, but this season Conqueror is even better. She only really needs that one item to kick off on the Hex tech, and already at the point where she has great damage and healing. And because of how easily she can one-shot people in an instant once she has that level 6, it's really imperative that the enemy team interrupts it or just dies. The solo carry, the 1v9 potential, comes from that huge ult AoE damage, in addition to the fact that she gets those resets, so if they don't interrupt her, she can just wipe out an entire enemy team. The second part of that is the mobility. It's really hard to lock her down while she's doing these things because of the fact that she can jump in and around a team fight. So much like the Vladimir, if you don't have the right team come to face her, then she's basically in a prime position to 1v9 you. And on 1v9 mid laners, how about that Fizz? Do you guys like Fizz? He is definitely the slipperiest. That's a word written down by Fi. It's not really a word, but I guess it's really the best description of this mid lane assassin. It's very difficult to lock him down, you know, you're noticing a trend here, difficult to lock down and stop him from doing anything. That's his carry power. He has relatively low cooldowns on that mobility, with obviously disgusting damage, especially when he summons a fish from the ground, which apparently gives him more superpowers than Aquaman. So you basically always have this ability to nuke one person down, and with Trickster and with that slip and slide, you can definitely get around a teamfight very well, and with that EQ and Zhonya's, basically once you hit the R on someone, there's nothing anyone can do. I mean, how can they when Q is targeted and W can't be dodged? And this is why we've had 3 mid laners in a row, because of the proximity to dragons, to herald, to side lanes, to jungle invades. When you have kits like the 3 champions we've just discussed, especially with the Fizz having decent scaling, high damage, and a lot of mobility, the power to 1v9 is very much in your hands. Now let's take a little trip down to the bottom lane, and here we have Miss Fortune. She actually has very little counterplay for an ADC, which is kind of weird because she doesn't actually have a dash. Basically built-in Moby boots, burst from high range with her ultimate, burst with Q, semi-burst with the W active, and anyone who lanes against her knows that once those things hit, you just lose HP in an instant. If you're looking to solo carry, it does scale well with a crit build, and this removes some of her weaknesses in the nature of cooldowns and orders over time. The fact that she has AoE damage, something most ADCs don't actually have, just ruins a whole team with a good, well-placed ultimate, especially if you have a Leona and a Malphite on your team. When you're misfortunate in that case, you just sit there and win. Her laning is decent, Q bounces, good burst as we mentioned, but once you're rolling with that 1 or 2 items, you've got some AD, you've got some crit in there. I know it can seem really weird talking about a 1v9 ADC, you know, an OP champion who has no mobility or dash, but it's very difficult to catch her because of her speed, and all you need is that decent positioning and she'll outrange any other AD or threat. And yes, we began with the most OP jungler in the game, Echo, but Elise is really actually not that far behind him. With the emphasis on early game ganking, doing a buff grump clear, and then straight into the lanes, Elise has such a well-rounded, well-developed kit for that phase. There is actually no other champion at level 3 who's probably stronger than her in terms of running a gank, a tower dive, 1v1ing enemy junglers, and basically being as annoying as a whole bunch of spiders on your ceiling. The point is then you say, well, a champion that's so well-rounded at level 3 and just dominates the map, who is good against her? And really all the champions that statistically do well against her just lack one part of her kit in terms of theirs, which means if you can use it to her advantage in that pre-6 phase, get a dragon, get lanes ahead, get yourself ahead, it's very difficult for anyone to actually shut her down. She very much doesn't have the scaling of the Echo, and later on, if you go too late, can just become a stun bot. But the fact that you have that much control over the early game means if you know what you're doing from a jungle route and a jungle pressure perspective, there's very little any other jungler can do. And because you have that kind of control, it makes her a very good solo carry jungler. And hidden within that, and I haven't even mentioned it yet, is that she has 6 abilities at level 3. If you know how to use all 6 well, you're on your way. Now for number 8, I'd like to address this new champion, Leona Nautocrank. And that's because we have a triumvirate of engage and destruction. Oh, and tankiness, lots of tankiness. Ultimate roam machines with a lot of crowd control, tanky, good kill lanes, decent damage in the terms of Leona, a lot more damage in terms of Nautilus, Blitzcrank is Blitzcrank. You can keep enemy champions in place for so long that any follow-up by your AD or anyone in your team will ensure the enemy team has to conduct an autopsy. Because you can control the lane, you can win it for your ADC, and you do that as Nautilus, but specifically Leona, by setting up the fights that it's really easy for your AD to follow. Even if your ADC is filled, even if they don't know what they're doing, even if it feels like your cat could do a better job, it still makes it very easy for them to do some damage on targets that are just locked down for about 100 years. And if that fails, it doesn't really matter because you can perma-roam, go and fight, invade with your jungler, take him out of the game, go to the mid lane, engage, use your ultimate. You can literally turn into another, probably better ganker with Moby Boots than your jungler is. This is really useful if you have something like a Karthus on your team. You can snowball every lane and simply use your engage in those fights to make sure you win. Either one of these picks can really help solo carry from the support position. Just make sure you win the lane and then carry the map. Now let's go back to the mid lane, but with Cassiopeia you can actually also go top. This can be really useful if you want your enemy top laner to rage like a common streamer. She's basically just a machine gun that runs over everyone at 3 items, stat-wise really spikes at 3+. I mean, you can still technically do that with 2 items, you know, the Riley's Leandry's combo. You just want to make sure the game goes late enough that having no mobility, because remember you can't buy boots, she has no legs, that it means once you're in range of the enemy player, they basically have nowhere to go when they die, and if they run, you chase them down. This season Conqueror is even better on her as well. You know, the healing changes did technically impact her a little bit, but what everyone forgets is that you also get AP stacking from the Conqueror. Combine that with her AP scaling E heal, it means you can just keep going longer and longer, and once you get caught in a chase down, it can kind of feel like a Vladimir just running at you and you die. Miasma is probably the single most OP ability in the game according to some players. It's slow, it's grounding, it's AoE, and once you use that into the ultimate, game over. And talking about running really fast at people's faces, our friendly neighborhood Viking is still around. Yes, his win rate is a little bit lower, but that's a lot to do with the fact that Echo is popular and Echo counters him. Remove Echo from the equation and his win rate might actually shoot up another % or 2. The problem with Olaf is that his ultimate basically nullifies the one thing that other players rely on to win games: crowd control. But that doesn't mean he's weak pre-6. He has a really good clear, a strong 1v1 skirmish, a conqueror that synergizes with his innate attack speed, healing, and lifesteal. He beats up many junglers in a straight 1v1, he can solo dragons and heralds, he can have presence in lanes, and once you're caught in an axe chain, if you have no flash or dash, yeah, you might want to pray to Odin because Olaf is not letting you escape. And if you turn, you might go to Valhalla, but you'll still die. Basically, if you can make 1 or 2 plays in the early game and you can get that ultimate lead over the enemy jungler, you can dominate all river skirmishes and you can actually close the game up quite quickly. You do not scale because of this, but the idea in this jungle is to get a 3-4 level lead over the enemy and use that to run the game down in the most literal sense so that it doesn't reach 30-40 minutes. Oh, Akali, you are next. Mid or top lane, least counterplay champion in this video. You know, maybe if you're watching this in 3 months, it might be a completely different champion again. But for now, she is basically the definition of high-skilled 1v9 material. Crazy mobility doesn't even begin to describe the 3 dashes, the slow from Gunblade, the healing from Conqueror plus Gunblade plus Q. Oh, and did we mention the Shroud and the ultimate? I mean, you have to let her make the mistake or pray she doesn't one-shot someone. Very, very high damage output, but very good damage over time as well while using her passive and basically spam Q. On a good player, no one can stop her, that's the thing. A bad player will be exploitable, but if the person wielding her has decent experience, she'll one-shot for maybe 1 or 2 items already. Dodge around, you can't catch her, and she'll just buy tons of time with that Shroud. Basically, everything you need to outplay the enemy and exert your micro-mechanical skill on the entire game and give you that solo carry material. And the reason she's further down this list is because she's much more tied to the skill of the player, but don't let that distract you from the fact that she probably has less counterplay than Vladimir. So that was quite intense, I think it got a bit animated, so let's relax a little bit, go back down to the chill support lane, and let's talk about Bird. Combo of insane roaming with meeps and tunnels, and it's just fun to say meeps and doots, and actually has decent damage. In fact, I think saying decent damage undersells it by quite a lot. He doesn't even normally buy support items. You can go Deadman's, Twin Shadows, Rapid Fire Cannon, and that's not a joke, that's an actual build. You can catch players from at least 12 parsecs away with your ultimate, basically to stun into free kills. You can also use it to go those nice early game tower dives. And you can get from one side of the map to the other in less time than the Falcon does that Castle run. And yeah, you don't have the raw CC and the tankiness of the earlier supports we talked about. You can definitely have a very high damage kill lane, make plays all over the map, provide good damage, and take your entire team and the enemy for a journey full of fun and fantasy. Although at the end of the game, you're the one getting the LP. Now let's keep it in the side lanes, but let's jump to the other side of the map. Mordekaiser. Yes, his passive got hit. Yes, his win rate did go down, but his really high damage and scaling is kind of a lot like Vlad in nature, except he's much easier to use, gets tankier through the health and the heals and the shield. He does also have Conqueror, he just doesn't have as much burst. Good old-fashioned mace smacking sustained damage. Basically just feels like you can't kill him because every time you think you can, shield pops up. Has more utility as well, slows, burns, the claw from the upside down, and basically will just press R to delete someone while they just run around and burn away with the passive, and after that you just mop everyone up. Now in terms of 1v9 potential and being very OP, we could easily talk about Nami, and I think you should keep her in your mind in terms of an enchanter being the best in the game, her one weakness being that she can get engaged upon, but we're talking 1v9 here, we want you to carry solo queue, so let's talk about Shaco instead. Yes, this is controversial, yes, it isn't used as much, and it's very much a weird one, but we wanted to bring something out that could be kind of unique for a lot of you players. It basically relies on the enemy team being dumb, which if we're to believe in comments and Reddit and Twitter, basically happens every game. You can box the whole lane, which is basically fun. You can box the enemy jungler so when they try and gank, you know, triggered, feared, and now you see them. If they try to fight you when you've boxed that lane, they will almost always lose with the damage and the fear. And later on in the game, you just have the tried and true good old show up from nowhere insane Shaco damage thing going on. You scale and you scale, you trap all around objectives, you force them to scan all the time, kind of like Teemo, but you know, more useful. But once they get feared and they're stuck in place and your team follows up in the late game, it's basically a free pick. Do not be surprised at how much he can burst and outplay, and he doesn't need his team to do it, which is why it's so useful. It also takes away some of the weaknesses he can have in other lanes. Straight up, you can just solo carry by being irritating. And if that sounds personal, it's because it really is. And finally, we need to talk about Caitlyn. Unlike a lot of champions in this list who have, you know, decent early games and really hit a good power spike, Caitlyn really is the epitome of scales into a 1v9 champion. That's solo carry, OP, high range, safety, damage over time, and burst with traps, by the way. That passive headshot basically makes her more of a machine gun than a sniper. Her main issue used to be this big dip she had in the mid game, and that really isn't a thing anymore with Stormrazor and Infinity Edge. She's very hard to dive on, and she can shut down with the traps and nets. If you don't gap close properly, once she uses that full combo and you step onto it, you're basically dead at any point in the game. And yes, I specifically said she scales into a 1v9 champion. However, her laning can be quite oppressive. Shove, get kills with traps, and then scales. Having that strong laning, having that safety makes it really nice to avoid those ganks, the tower dives, the roaming mid laners that we talked about. And if you can learn to animation cancel or machine gun with a headshot, combo properly with the net, trap, etc., you will really be able to hard carry games. These Caitlyn micro mechanics are hard, it's not easy to learn and get really good at, but if you're looking to climb from this position, no other AD can put up more damage if it's done right, which is kind of nice considering the volatility of the supports you could run into. And that's why I mentioned so many supports in this video, because of the impact they can have on lane if done well, on the enemy jungler by shutting them down with deep vision and good roams, and how they can also impact the map. their itemization being quite good with the Season 10 iteration. But that being said, all champions on this list, all 15, have a supreme power to 1v9, they are OP, they are best in the meta. Pick these up, learn them well, and go get that LP. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you were able to enjoy and learn something. Please do like, share, and comment the Mobalytics channel if you did. I have been your host Virkayu. Best of luck in your games this week, and as always, I will see you all in the next video.